You should push yourself beyond your limits of tolerance to find out where it is. How much can you work? How disciplined can you become? Like, can you work 12 hours a day? Can you work 8 hours a day? Can you work 3 hours a day? Like, flat out. Where's your limit? And how much work can you do, and how much socialization? You should find out. Push yourself past and then back off to that point where it's optimally sustainable. It's what they're doing, and I would say in sort of a haphazard way, right? Because there's that instinct to go out there and do more.
Right.
But it's unregulated, and it's not as self-conscious as it might be. It's good to know that it's good to think about that as a goal. It's like you're trying to discover what your limitations are. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is age appropriate, and you want to push yourself in every direction that you can, but you should be doing that with an aim in mind. It's like you're trying to make yourself into a better and more competent person. And so some discipline along with the fun is a good idea. Pushes you beyond what you already are. If you have a choice, it's not that uncommon that what we'll do is choose to be pushed to the limit, especially when we're at our best. We think, well, where's the limit? It's here. Maybe I can manage that. I'm going to push myself right to the damn limit. Then I'm going to push myself a little bit over just to see if it's possible. And if that happens, then, you emerge with a sense of triumph. I'm now more than I was, right? And maybe that's what you're here to be, is to be more than you were. Right, to push those limits. One of the things I recommended to people, and I've had quite a few people, if you find out that you can carry a heavy load and take care of yourself and have a little left over for some other people, then you can wake up at 3 a.m. and think, well, man, I could be worse. If you're trying to get your life together and your friends get in the way, that's actually real useful for you, because you've now identified who your friends aren't. And you might think, well, I can't give them up. It's like, oh, yes, you can. And not only can you should, and it would be better for them. Because if they're aiming down and they want you going down with them, there's nothing good about what's happening to them, and there's certainly nothing good about that for you. You discount the risk of familiarity. I have a job I hate. It's like, well, yeah, but I'm not dying from it. It's like not as bad as it can be. So you factored in the risks already. They get invisible. You think, well, I can't jump out of this job because what about all the risk? It's like, yeah, no kidding. You got to get your resume in order. You got to send it out. You got to send 50 of the damn things out before anybody will call you back. Then you have to go get interviewed, and maybe you're not any good at that. You have to come up with a story while you're a good employee, and maybe you're not yet. So you have to figure out how to do that. It's like, what about all these risks if I go look for a new job? It's like, yeah, absolutely, man. Those are risks, and they're harsh, and no wonder you're avoiding them. What about the risks for you to stay with this job you absolutely hate? Well, let's think that through. Okay, so I have this dead-end job. I hate it. I'm getting bitter. Where am I going to be in 5 years? I know where, because I've watched this with people. You're going to be just like you are now, except a lot more of what's good about you is going to be gone, and a lot more of what's terrible is going to be amplified. And you're going to be like, in 5 years, you're going to be 10 years older instead of 3 years older.
Because it kills your spirit somehow.
Oh, man. Yeah. So it's like, you think, oh, my God, there's a terrible risk in pursuing this new job. It's like, yeah, there is a terrible risk. There's a terrible risk in you staying with your job right now. And so one of the things that's really, really freeing to understand is that you're screwed no matter what you do. There's no secure path forward. Give it up. It's risk everywhere. You think, oh, my God, that's terrible. It's like, yes, except for 2 things. You can pick your risk. That's the first thing. So you get to pick your poison. That's something. And second, you're a lot tougher than you think. So even though there's risk everywhere, if you confront it forthrightly, what you'll find is that you can actually handle the risk. And that's the security.
Why are you afraid of being weak?
Well, it's the weakness that I was referring to. Well, it's fear. It's essentially fear of hell. If you make yourself weak, life is very hard. If you make yourself weak and you suffer stupidly because of it, you will become bitter. And once you become bitter, you will become vengeful. And after vengeful, there is no limit. That's one of the things I learned from studying totalitarianism in the 20th century, because I studied it from the psychological perspective. I wasn't interested in the mass movements. I was interested in the motivations of the cruelest Auschwitz guard. What was he up to exactly? Just exactly where did he dwell and why? It's like, well, weakness made him suffer stupidly, and that made him cruel, and that was just the beginning. And so that weakness, that's just, if you make yourself weak by engaging in deceit, if you fail to take responsibility, then you transform yourself into something that cannot bear to endure the structure of existence, and you will torture yourself. And that leads to very bad places, very bad places. you're a young man, you see someone drive by in a Ferrari with a blonde, and you think, my God, he's got everything. And, the woman in the car is a prostitute who's got a cocaine addiction, and her life is just one catastrophe after another. And he's had to lie and cheat his way into this position, and he's afraid that everything's going to come crashing down on him, and that's what you're jealous of. And it's just not that profound. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough, and your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better. We're built to walk uphill. And when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's the uphill climb that it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. So almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, and that's to be filled with the Spirit of God, by the way, because that's what enthusiasm means. That's experienced in relationship to a goal. And so in some sense, and this is part of the religious enterprise, you want a goal that you can never attain, right? So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. And that's why the highest levels of virtue and goal are in some sense transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month, and depressed and aimless and goalless. You want a horizon of ever-expanding possibility.
If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where you are, and you don't know where you're going. And if you're in a place where you don't know where you are or where you're going, you're in danger, because that's unmapped territory, and God only knows what lurks in unmapped territory. And you can think about that biologically. If you're somewhere you don't understand and you don't know where you're going, well, there's always the possibility of predation. But you can think about it metaphysically too, and that's worthwhile. If you're so confused and disoriented that you don't know where you are or where you're going, there are predators of the spirit who are much worse than snakes that are waiting in wait for you. And the probability that you'll move from aimless, hopeless, joyless anxiety to nihilism, corrosive bitterness, and genocidal fantasy in the fundamental extreme is very high. And so that's possession by a predator of the spirit in the desert of the soul. And that's real.
Part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt, because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people are capable, and you as well, And without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. And you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims. Let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is they're just like you. And if you don't know that, that just means that you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon, because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a paragon of wisdom, but it's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. If you're disciplined, in fact, that's almost what discipline means. Discipline means that you're capable of making sacrifices, because you're not disciplined if you just do something you want more rather than something that you're doing. That's not discipline. Maybe that works and great. If your life is working out that way, great, man. But that isn't discipline. Discipline is when you want to do something right now.
And then you have to figure out how to decompose what you want into actionable steps, right? And those would be the sorts of things that you could put in a schedule. Now, that would mean that your schedule would hypothetically consist of things that maybe you don't exactly want to do, although that would be good, but at least you understand the importance of doing and are therefore somewhat motivated to do. And then you need to break those steps down into small enough increments that you're highly likely to undertake them. You have to negotiate with yourself and figure out what the largest step you would take towards your goal is that you would take. And if you don't do it, then you make the step smaller and smaller until you find something that you would do.
And instead you think, no, I'm going to forestall my gratification, maybe forever, but certainly for a very long period of time, medium to long period of time. And you concentrate on something that you think will bear fruit in the medium to long run. And so you look into the future and you decide that by making today a little less impulsively pleasurable, shall we say, you'll make tomorrow a little bit more secure and productive. And then you actually do it too. And that's difficult. Talking to people who agree with what you say is like walking around in a desert. You already know everything that they say. The reason you're associating with them in that situation is so that they never say anything that challenges you, because you're afraid that if you go outside of what you understand, that you won't be able to tolerate the chaos. It might be useful to listen to people that annoy you on the off chance that they know something that, if they tell you, you can use instead of dying. People have an unbelievable capacity to face and overcome things they don't understand. And not only that, that's essentially what gives life its meaning.
Don't do nothing. That's a big mistake, because all you do is get older and weaker and you withdraw more. And so even if you don't know what to do, pursuing nothing is a very bad idea. You have no hope then, because hope comes from pursuit, and you're anxious because you need to specify a path. So you have no hope and you're anxious if you do nothing. So nothing is not the answer. So why don't we just look and see what other people do that seems to work? So you don't know what to do with your life. Well, let's break your life down. Probably you want an intimate partner. Most people do. Now, you might not, but probably you do, even if you think you don't. And so you might be one of those exceptions, but don't assume that to begin with, because that's an uncomfortable place to be if it's true. Now, maybe you're a radically creative genius like Leonardo da Vinci or Picasso, and you're so idiosyncratic that you can't bind yourself to any one person. But, they were 1 in a billion, and probably you're not. Now, maybe you are, but that's a whole different kettle of fish. Probably you want a family, some sort. Parents, you want to have a relationship with them. Siblings, children, most people have children. That's the best relationship you're ever going to have if you're fortunate enough to engage in it. And so you probably need a vision for that of some sort. Friends, helpful to have some friends. You could develop a vision for that. You need a job or a career, because otherwise you die, and people think you're useless. They shun you and then you die. That's a bad outcome unless that's what you're after. You should regulate your behavior in relationship to temptations like drug and alcohol abuse and sex, because short-term impulsive hedonic gratification doesn't play out well across time, and it tends to make you unpopular. So That's not a good recipe for long-term progress into the future. You should think hard about doing something on the civic front. You should take care of yourself mentally and physically. You should have a plan for that. You need an educational plan because there's probably something you could learn and get better at, and that doesn't have to be academic. It could be extremely practical or creative. And you should figure out how to make productive, generous use of the time you have when you're not working. And so that's like a conservative vision, right? Because it fleshes out the generic landscape of human striving. And it's a good place to start if you don't know where to start. You could start with one of those things and move towards it.
Positive emotion is associated with movement forward. Like if you're where you want to be and things are going well, then your behavior should be activated so that you go and get things. Now, one of the negative consequences of that is that if you're really in a good mood, really happy, you're going to be impulsive and make mistakes. Positive emotion makes people impulsive. Maniacs, for example. If you're manic, you're one happy person. Way too happy. Everything is great. Nothing but wonderful things that are beyond your imagination are going to happen to you. And then a week later, you crash into your depressive episode and you realize that you're $150,000 in debt and you've alienated everyone that you know. It's like that's untrammeled positive emotion. So how about no? A pure index of positive emotion is no way of determining whether or not a system is working properly, even your own system. You need a balance between positive and negative emotions. Plus, positive emotions are absolutely exhausting because if you're in a manic episode, it's like, it's time to get everything good right now. Fine, but you won't sleep for a week and then you die because you just burned yourself to a crisp. And so to be overwhelmingly enthusiastic about everything sounds like a real blast. It's really not good. You need a balance between these two systems because the whole world isn't explored territory bursting with nothing but promise. That's not the world. The world is that in a bounded space a little bit with an absolute horror show going out around the periphery. And both systems need to be active in order to keep you balanced.